I'm Dr. Zainab, and I would like to continue my lecture because yesterday it was cut short because of the lack of time. So we were doing the races, and the human kind, it is divided into three primary races, and there are many mixtures. But the three primary races are the Caucasoid, the Negroids, and the Mongoloids. The Caucasoids are those which have got a fair skin. They have got light blue or gray iris. They have got light color or golden hair, maybe brown color, and these hair may be either straight or they may be a bit wavy. They are generally tall in stature. Their nose is very narrow and thin. The lips are also thin. The eyes are small. The second race is the Negroes. They have got dark skin. They have got black eyes, black irises, and black or dark brown tight curly hair. They are taller in stature. Most of the Negroes, they are very tall. They are even taller than the Caucasian. So they are taller in stature. The nose is big. It is wide nose. Lips are thick and they are also everted. The eyes, they are also large. Prognathism is present in the face. I may be unable to explain what prognathism is. You can say that the shape of the face of the Negroes may be resembling that of a mango. That is their lower jaw. It is jutting forward. The third race, they are the Mongolites. They have got various tones of skin. Generally, it is yellow or brown, but some of them they are very fair, like the Japanese or some of them who are residing in cold climate in Russia. But most of them they have got yellow or brown skin. They have got black irises and black straight and coarse hair. They do not have curly or wavy hairs. They are shorter in stature as compared to the Caucasoid and the Negroid. They have got shorter stature. Their nose is small. The lips, they are also thin, and the eyes, they are also small eyes with an epic and thick fold. The cheekbones are prominent. They are high. The width of the face, it is greater. Now, there are differences of the races not only in the soft tissues but also in the bones. So most of the bony differences, they are present in the skull bones and also in the long bones. So in the long bones, femur and tibia are especially very helpful in this regard. We can measure certain measurements. One is known as cephalic index, the other is the nasal index, and the third is the height index, which may be helpful. ये बात सुनिए, आगे नहीं जा रहा. Next slide. So the cephalic index is something which is very helpful in determining the race of the person. We take the breadth of the skull at the maximum diameter across the skull bones above the mastoid processes, and then the length of the skull is measured between the glabella and the external occipital protuberance from anteroposterior. The measurement should be done by calipers and not by a measuring tape. So then the calculation is done, and on the base of this calculation, we can divide the skull into dolichocephalic, mesocephalic. So dolichocephalic or the long-headed, when the index is between 75 and 79.9. Brachycephalic or round-headed when the index is 80 or more. And the mesocephalic or mesocephalic when the index is about 80. The Mongoloids, which have got round head, wide width of the skull and the face is more. So the Mongoloid race is brachycephalic. The Caucasians, they are mesati or mesocephalic, whereas the Negroids, they are dolichocephalic. We can also have some help from the mandible and teeth. The lower jaw is strongly prognathic. Star-shaped configuration is seen on the occlusal surface of the molars. When we have done the teeth, we have seen that the first molar, the occlusal or the chewing surface, it may have got 5 cusps and there may be a star-shaped formation present on the molars. The third molar is bigger than the first 2 molars in the black, but it is not so in the other races, because in Mongoloid as well as in the white races, the third molar is the smallest. First molar is bigger and third molar is the smaller. But in the Negroes, it may be opposite, that the first molar, permanent molar, the mandible molar, may have a star-shaped configuration on the occlusal surface. It may have got 5 cusps, and the third molar may be bigger than the first molar and the second molar. The, the other characteristic which is present in the Mongoloid is that the upper central incisor of the Mongols, they are frequently shovel-shaped. That is, their lingual surface is scooped, shovel-shaped. Most of us Pakistani also have got these type of upper central incisor teeth. Then there is another index, which is radiohumeral index and tibiofemoral index. Now, in the Negroid races, the radius and the tibia, both of them, they are very long. It is not that these bones are longer than humerus or the femur, but they are very long. As compared to the other races, the length of the radius ulna and the tibia and the fibula, it is more. That's why the black people, they have got very lengthy limbs. So in the European, the radiohumeral index may be below 75, and in the Mongoloid, it may be 80. And in the tibiofemoral index, in the European, it may be below 83, and in the Mongoloid, it may be more than 83. So this is the skull of various people. So the Caucasian skull, it is mesaticephalic. The Mongoloid skull, it is brachycephalic, where the width of the face and the width of the skull, it is more. And the Negroid skull, it is a bit compressed in the top and it is jetting forward. So from the measurements of the anteroposterior measurement and the width of the skull, we can have the cephalic index, which is going to tell us about the various readings, and upon the basis of these readings, we can divide the skulls into the 3 primary races. Now, the stature of the person is also a primary character. Identification of a person by the body measurement is the basis of the anthropometry. You remember there is a method which is known as Bertillon's method of anthropometry. So here what they do, that they take various measurements of the body parts and they keep a record, and they say that this is a method through which we can identify a person. But nowadays anthropometry has been strengthened or supplemented by other methods also, like photography, fingerprinting, description, and scars or moles, tattoos, etc. These are also entered into the record. The various bones of the body, they bear a definite relationship to the height of the person. For this purpose, the skull bones can be utilized, but more accurate results are obtained from studying the height of the long bones, especially the femur and tibia. So we can estimate the height of the person, the stature of the person from the skull bones also, but the most accurate readings will be when we study the height of the long bones, that is the femur and the tibia. The humerus, the radius and ulna, that is bones of the upper limb, they are not so consistent. Now, working formula for the estimation of stature may be that we can take the height of the skull and we multiply it with 8, and that would be the height of the person. So these are just working formula. So you can see the various people and their stature. The female, they are short in stature. There is three things which are very helpful when we are determining the stature of a person. One is the age. A person who is of lesser age before puberty will be shorter. A person who is a female will be shorter, and a person belonging to the Mongoloid race will be shorter. So they have shown the height of various world leaders, and you can see Barack Obama from US, who was a Negroid. He is one of the tallest person, and on the second number is David Cameron from UK, because both these races, they are tall races. French, the French, they are a mixed race. They are Latin, so they are not as tall as the Nordic people or Scandinavian people or the British people, so they are a bit small. And the female also, she is smaller. The stature prediction formula from femur, maximum length of the femur. Now here there is a photograph which is giving us the method to take the maximum length of the femur. It is not made by a inch tape or a scale or something. There is an osteometric board which is going to determine the maximum length of the femur. So if this is different for the male and for the female, if the person is belonging to Caucasian or white races, European ancestry, the females, we take the maximum length of the femur, we have to multiply it with 2.47, and then we have to add 54.74, and that would be the stature of the person. And there may be an error in the estimation. The standard error of estimation may be 3.72 centimeters. There are many formula which are present to calculate the stature of the person from the length of the bones. Some of them, they are very accurate, and some are just working formula. For the males, we have to take the maximum femoral length, we have to multiply it with 2.38, and we have to add 61.41, and the standard error in the estimation is 3.27 centimeters. So for this, we have to have the stature of the person in the life, and there should not be any change in the stature. Like if a person is suffering from some disease or because of old age, then there may be shortening of the stature. So these are various measurements which have been taken from the humerus, the total length, the bicondylar width, then the diameter of the shaft, the diameter of the head. So these are various measurements which are to be taken from the long bones, and this is the work of a specialist, and special equipment is required for the estimation of stature from the bones. Here we see a bone which is still immature. This is the femur bone. You can see the lower end, it is not fully formed, and you can see that the neck of the femur is present, but the trochanter, greater trochanter, is incomplete, and also the head has been separated because there has been epiphyseal cartilage which has been removed. It is a cartilaginous portion, and because the ossification has not been completed, so the head is lost. So here the complete length of the bone cannot be taken. So here you can see the osteometric board, and through the osteometric board, the length of the bone, it is being taken. This is a femur bone, a completely ossified adult bone, and the doctor is taking the total length of the femur through the osteometric board. Next we come to the tattoos and the scars. So tattoos are different designs which are made upon the skin by multiple and small puncture wounds with the needles which are dipped in a dye. You can see a tattoo on the thigh, lateral side of the thigh and upper leg of the person. It looks like a carving. This is because of the various colors which have been used. Here it is another tattoo. You can see the different colors which have been used in making this tattoo, the design, the colors, the situation. These are individual, and the tattoo if the tattoo is on a part of the body which is visible to the other people, the people they may be knowing that the person was supporting a particular tattoo, and the identification of the person or identification of the dead body may be done through the presence of this tattoo. Another tattoo, you can see that there is a tattoo of the eagle, and this tattoo is actually made to conceal certain scars. If you look very minutely, you can see that there are certain heel scars present which have been concealed by this tattoo. And there are again certain heel scars which are present on the other limb, and also there are needle marks present. So most probably the people who are in the habit of using drug through the intravenous injections, they want to conceal this fact by the formation of a tattoo upon their limbs. Another tattoo, and this is the tattoo of a scorpion on the back of the skin, back of the chest. Now this is a scar, a heel scar which is present on the face. Heel scar which is present on the face because it is present on the face. So any person who looks at the face of this person will be able to notice the scar. So then the scar has got a particular shape, a position, that is, it is present between the both eyebrows on the upper part of the bridge of the nose and low part of the forehead, and it is curving, it is inverted, J-shaped. Here there is another scar. Actually, this is a wound present which has been stitched. Certain wounds are stitched by the application of stitches with the silk. Here there are metal staples which have been applied, and this after the removal of these metal staples, it will leave the scar. There is another scar which is present on the forearm. Another scar which is present on the face and on the cheek. It is roughly Y-shaped in its configuration, and it may have been caused by some blunt weapon, or it may have been caused by a sharp weapon. But because on the face there are certain injuries which, though are laceration, they resemble incise wound. But because of its situation on the face, everybody will be able to see it, and they may be able to recognize the person because of this prominent scar. Then there are pitted scars present. Pitted scar which are due to various diseases. a keloid scar, raised scar. Keloids are more prominent and more common in the negroid race, but there is a hypertrophic scar. Here you can see that there is a hypertrophic scar present. So there is a scar present on the face, on the left side of the angle of the mouth, and also there are smaller scar present on the chin. And after the surgical intervention and after maybe the treatment with corticosteroids, the scarring has become less and the scar has become less evident. Similarly, you can see the scar on the cheek and on the angle of the mouth. The scars, they are very helpful in identification, not only of the person, but also of the instrument through which they have been caused. And many a times, the surgeon who has treated these injuries, they may have the record, the surgical record through which it can be compared. Again, there is scarring present, excessive tissue formation, fibrous tissue formation present, and with the passage of time, the excessive fibrosis, it may become less, and the scar may become less prominent. Now, the tattoos are permanent marks which are visible through the skin surface, that is epidermis. Even when these are removed, pigment can be seen in the draining lymph nodes. So, the tattooing is done in such a way that the pigment is deposited in the below the epidermis and in the upper layer of the dermis, because if it is present in the epidermis only, it would be rubbed off, and if it is present beneath the dermis, it will not be observable. So what happens that the dipping of the needle is such that the dye is dipped, the dye is deposited in the dermal layers, and from that portion, some of the dye, it is taken by the macrophages and it is deposited in the draining lymph nodes. So if we know that a person was supporting a tattoo, and when we examine such a person and no tattoos are present, then we can, in the dead body, we can also examine the draining lymph nodes, and on dissection or on histopathological examination of the lymph node, we may be able to find the dye present. Tattoos are specific in relation to its anatomical situation, where it was present, its size, its color, and its design. It may be helpful in identification of the living as well as in the dead, if it is known that the person was supporting a particular tattoo on his body. Scars are also very helpful in identification. These may be congenital scar or these may be acquired. Congenital scars may be the scars of congenital syphilis, but most of the scars, they are acquired. These may be acquired due to trauma, due to disease, due to infections, or due to surgical operations. Some of the scars may be occupational or may be due to certain, the person may be engaged in various types of trade and they may be having these scars. Like those people who are stone cutters, they may have these small stones embedded in the skin, leading to scarring. Now, next we come to another very important method of identification. It is a newer method of identification. It has been practiced in the world for some time, but in Pakistan, it has been introduced quite recently. One of the more revolutionary advances in identification in the recent year is the so-called DNA fingerprinting. Well, there is no fingerprinting present, but it has been given the name fingerprinting because it is as effective as the fingerprints in identification of the person. And it has got certain advantages also upon dactylography. This is the technique advised by Alec Jeffrey, who who has discovered that there are virtually unique sequences of bases in the DNA strands of chromosomes, and these are used to compare one blood or tissue sample with another and to investigate genetic relationships. So suppose if we have got the genetic composition of a person in record with us, and if we come across another sample, maybe a cigarette butt, and from that cigarette butt we take the saliva stain, and from the saliva stain the cells are taken, chromatin material is taken, and the DNA is analyzed, and this DNA is compared with the DNA which we have got in our record. And if there is a match, it means that this chance DNA on the cigarette butt is the same from the same person whose DNA pattern we have got in our record. So this method can compare blood or tissue sample with one another, and also it can investigate genetic relationship. Now this genetic relationship, it is very important because in other methods we cannot use this. Now, so if we take the example of radiology, or we take the example of fingerprinting, we have to have the blood group or the fingerprints of the suspect for comparison. And if we have got the blood groups or the fingerprints or the photograph of the parents, we cannot compare the genetic material of one person with that of his parents or brother and sisters. But if we have got DNA from a suspect and we do not have any record of the DNA of such a person, we can compare that DNA with the DNA of the parents, the father, mother, the brother, and so it is going to give us the genetic relationship. This method is extensively used nowadays in the identification of the criminals, in the identification of the burnt body, like the plane crash which has occurred last month. The people, they are the dead bodies of the people on board. It is being identified through the DNA examination. The detail of the techniques are complex and they require highly specialized reagent and apparatus. The method needs highly trained forensic scientists for its application for medical legal problems. All the deoxyribonucleic acid or the DNA that forms the genetic material is composed of two strands of sugar and phosphate molecules that are twisted into double helix that is bound together by links formed by adenine and thymine, cytosine and guanine. Each helical twist has got 10 such links like rungs on a twisted ladder. बिल्कुल जैसे सीढ़ियों में वो स्टेप से बने होते हैं ना हॉरिजॉन्टल, उसी तरह से इसमें भी होते हैं. A single DNA molecule may have millions of such links, and the permutation of the bases in each adjacent link creates the genes, the segment of the DNA that carries the genetic information. There is about a meter of DNA in each human nucleus, but only 10% is used for genetic coding, the rest being redundant. That is, it is lying dormant, not taking part in any chemical reactions. These silent segments, which are sometimes called the stutters, they may be 200 to 14,000 repeats of each identical sequence on each DNA strand. During investigation into a specific gene, like that for synthesizing myoglobin, Jeffries has found that the adjacent redundant segments varied greatly in the base sequence, but that they were constant for a given individual. So there is a genetic difference in one person from the other, but in the same person, in the same individual, the base sequence is the constant. They were transmitted from the parents in regular fashion. So half of that helix is from the mother and half is from the father. So we can compare the DNA material of a person with the parents also. In other words, they are formed a signature that was virtually identical, and it was transmitted onto the fertilized ovum by the parents, the chance of 2% sharing the same sequence, according to Jeffrey, is about 1 in a million billion. So even among the siblings, the chances are only 1 in 10,000 billions. To identify the redundant segments, which are often called the millisatellite or hypervariable region, a minute amount of human tissue containing nuclear material is required. So this is another advantage, that we do not require much tissue or specimen. Just a very small amount of human tissue containing the nuclear material may be sufficient to extract and study the DNA fingerprinting. It may be a small volume of blood containing the leukocyte, or it may be a semen sample, or pulp from the tooth, or a hair with some sheath cells at the root. Now, in this, they have started with the first specimen as blood. Now, when we doctors are doing some medical legal work, we do not generally take blood as a good sample, because it is going to putrefy, and also the RBCs, they do not have any chromatin material. But if the suspect person is available, he is to be taken to the lab, and in the laboratory they may take the blood, or preferably they take the buccal smear. Even then, if blood is present, because blood is the most commonly present tissue, so if blood is present, even a small amount, we may find that there are leukocytes present in the blood, and from that leukocyte we can take the material for DNA. Similarly, in the semen, it's not only the sperms which contain the DNA, there are other cells also. Any nucleated cell may be sufficient to give the DNA. So similarly, pulp from the tooth or sheath cells which are present in the root of a pulled hair. So these things, they may be sufficient to extract the DNA. The DNA from the contained nuclear material is broken up into segments and then into bands, transferred to nylon or nitrocellulose sheet and subjected to a DNA probe. It is a single strand of DNA labeled with radioactive phosphorus 32. This latches onto the separated mini satellite fragments, and by radiography, the position of each band is rendered visible on an X-ray plate. The end result is a series of parallel bars similar in appearance to the barcode printed on goods in a supermarket. From the presence of different bars in given positions, comparison can be made with other samples. So this is a classic forensic technique of comparison. For identification, we have to do the comparison. So in DNA examination also, we have to do the comparison. So we may have a known sample of DNA, and the end result is there are certain barcodes present. And then we have a chance of the same person, and some nuclear material is present, and that is analyzed, and the same barcodes, they are obtained, and then we compare both of them, and if they tally, then it means that both the specimens are from the same person. The test is quite simple, and it can identify seminal fluid in the vagina of a victim of a murder rape, and it can be matched against a blood DNA pattern of a suspected. And there is no need to match semen against semen, as all the DNA in a given person must by the definition be identical. So suppose if there is saliva present, it is semen present, it is a hair present, it is a tissue present under the nail beds from the assailant under the nails of the victim. So anything can be giving the DNA pattern, because DNA pattern in every cell of the body, it is the same. It is not required that blood should be matched with the blood or semen should be matched with the semen. A few hair root found on a blunt instrument in the possession of the suspect from a murdered person can be matched against the autopsy blood sample. So suppose if a person has been murdered by some blunt weapon, and that blunt weapon has been found in the possession of the murderer or the suspect, and on the examination of that instrument or the weapon, we find that there are certain hair which are adhering onto the instrument or the weapon. These can be collected, and then blood may be taken during the autopsy examination, and both can be meshed. In sexual crime cases, a great advantage of DNA testing over the conventional blood group secretor status is that DNA can distinguish between the mixed semen and vaginal fluid from a swab, which can be confused or negate blood group techniques. Now, when we take a seminal swab from the vagina, it is always contaminated by the vaginal secretions. So the vaginal secretions may be giving the same reaction when we are doing the blood groups. But when we are performing the DNA examination, the DNA of the victim will be separated and the DNA of the assailant, it will be separated. So there will not be any false positive, neither there will be any false negative reports. So whenever there is DNA material present, it is a must that the genetic code must have come either from the mother or from the father. Half of the number from each infesting the coding is made from the child mother. Now this is in the case of the lost child or mixed up babies. That is, we take the sample of the mother, we take the sample of the child, and we take the sample of the father, and the bars in the child's code are first matched with those in the mother's pattern. The remaining bars then must correspond with those from the father. If not, then that person cannot be the father of the child. Now, the samples which are required for DNA testing. Now, post-mortem material, that is when we take sample from the dead body, it is inferior to live blood and tissues for DNA fingerprinting. If any significant post-mortem changes have proceeded enough to break down the nuclear chromatin. So actually it means that if we have to take blood during the post-mortem examination, it is not a very good specimen. But we can take blood from a live person under the optimal laboratory conditions. Plain blood samples should be taken, however, though leukocytes may have already disintegrated, the best material is said to be the spleen. And if decomposition is advancing, bone marrow is also recommended. So there are various specimens which may be taken, like blood, which is not considered very good. Second is the spleen, but there are certain difficulties which are attached to taking the spleen, and I'll be telling you later on what are those. Then if the spleen is decomposing, we can take the bone marrow, we can take the bone and then the bone marrow also. About 10 cc in sterile test tube should be taken, and it should be frozen at minus 20 degrees centigrade if it is likely to be delayed. Any delay, okay? But so suppose if I have taken the spleen or the bone marrow, I may not be having the facility to keep it frozen at minus 20 degrees during its storage and during its transit from the place where post-mortem examination has been performed up to the DNA laboratory. That's why we prefer other specimens where freezing is not required. In sexual offenses associated with homicide, as much material as can be obtained from the vagina should be collected. It should be either fluid, by pipette, or multiple swabs may be taken from the vagina, rectum, and mouth. These again should be frozen if there is more than a few hours delay in transit to the laboratory. Otherwise, they should be dried, because in a dried tissue or in a dried sample, putrefaction is not going to occur. As per requirement of the DNA laboratory, one or both nails from the big toe or a tooth, usually a canine, is to be collected during post-mortem examination or DNA examination from the dead body. So because of the working condition in our country, they are not optimal or ideal. So the DNA laboratory, the Punjab Forensic Science Agency laboratory, and the DNA section, they say that when you are performing a post-mortem examination and you are to take the sample for DNA examination, it is better to take one or both nails from the big toes. If the nails are not available, then we can extract, we can take a tooth. It may be any tooth, but preferably it should be canine, because in the canine the pulp cavity is longer and the cells may be more in. And and then sometime we may also have to take the bone. Now, in the sex crimes, the DNA examination has become very important. In our country also, everybody knows the case of that murder, serial killer and murderer, rapist in Kasur, who has murdered 10 small children. And then he has been identified through the DNA examination, and then he has been convicted. So the role of DNA in examination of the sex crime has been introduced very late in the 20th century. Before the use of DNA, the examination was mainly done physically and few chemical tests were performed. The use of DNA has given a new turn to the examination of the sex crimes. Now, the structure of DNA, you know that DNA that forms the genetic basis of the cell is composed of backbone and nitrogen bases. Backbone is formed by the phosphate group and the pentose sugar. Bases contain the adenine and guanine, cytosine. So, how this examination is conducted? First of all, the sample is to be collected. The sample may be a chance sample, sample may be post-mortem sample may be a medico-legal from the living person, or sample may be collected in the laboratory from a living person. And then DNA profiling is done, and then obtaining the result and interpreting these results. Mind you, this result is quite difficult, and interpretation of this result is even more different. It is really very difficult. So collection of the specimen is the sample usually obtained for DNA testing are blood sample. Now this blood sample is not to be taken by the doctor himself, and it is that the police is going to take the accused or the victim to the laboratory, and there they can take the blood, because if we take the blood and we send it in the syringe or in a vial or in a bottle, it is likely that blood is going to putrefy and the sample will be useless. But blood sample can be taken, when seminal sample can be taken from the body and the clothes of the victim. Then clothes, the fingernails, the tissue which may be present under the fingernails of the victim, that may be scraped and that may be taken for blood or tissue of the assailant, and that may be sent to the laboratory for the detection of DNA of the assailant. DNA profiling, it is also known as DNA testing or DNA typing or DNA fingerprinting. Fingerprinting is like misnomer है, because it has been equated to dactylography. It is the identification of the individuals on the basis of their respective DNA profile. DNA profiles are basically just sets of numbers that can be used as an identifier. The number set can be encrypted to a DNA identification number. So there are various techniques which PCR, like nowadays, it is not only for forensic purpose, it is also being used for the clinical. So nowadays, coronavirus is being identified by the PCR, polymerase chain reaction. RFLP analysis, STR. Most of the medico-legal work is conducted by the STR analysis. It is short tandem repeat. And if the nuclear material is not present, mitochondrial analysis can be performed. Mitochondria also contain the DNA, and the mitochondrial DNA, it is the maternal only, whereas nuclear DNA, it is 50% from the father and 50% from the mother. Then amplification, FLP, and Y chromosome analysis. which is going to tell us about the sex of the person also. These are various. PCR is a technique used to amplify few copies of the pieces of DNA, generating millions or more copies of a particular DNA sequencing. Method relies on thermal cycling. This is an instrument consisting of cycles of repeated heating and cooling of the reaction for DNA melting and enzymatic replication of the DNA. Replication means it is being reproduced, you can say. Primers, which are the short DNA fragments containing sequence complementary to the target region along DNA polymerase, are key component to enable selective and repeated amplification. These things are really quite difficult for a medical graduate to understand and to retain. So there are various steps, denaturing steps, and then annealing and extension. Various steps are present. The RFLP was one of the first application of DNA analysis to forensic investigation. STR analysis nowadays, the short tandem repeat technology is used to evaluate specific regions which are known as loci within the nuclear DNA variability in the STR regions. It can be used to distinguish one DNA from another. Standard sets of 13 specific STR regions are used for CODIS. Now, you can remember that in the case of fingerprints, we have to have at least 16 points of comparison or matching. So when we are using DNA for identification and the STR analysis, the standards is that there should be matching at 13 specific STR regions or loci. So 13 loci they should compare in a known specimen and in a chance specimen. When 13 loci they are going to match, then only we can say that both these samples are from the same person. And CODIS is, there are different definitions for CODIS. I say it is criminal offenders DNA identification system. So when we have got, suppose if a person has been convicted and has been sent to jail, there they have taken as a record his or her DNA. If that person has been released or has served his sentence in the jail or has escaped and then has been involved in the same crime again. So when we find the chance specimen of DNA and that is analyzed and then it is compared with the DNA which is present in the record, and if there is a matching at 13 loci, then for the CODIS, this is a system. It is sufficient to say that this is the DNA from the same person. CODIS is a software program that operates local, state, and national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and unsolved crime scene. Okay? Suppose if a person is a serial killer and in one of the dead bodies we have found some DNA evidence of the assailant, that information will be stored. And then he kills another person. Suppose if he leaves at the scene of crime a cigarette butt or some eatable or maybe a handkerchief or anything from where the DNA of this person has been taken, and then it is, when it is being compared with the first DNA, we can say that he is the same murderer who has killed another person. So in this way, the DNA profile can help in the identification of the person. The odd that two individuals have the same 13 loci DNA profile is about 1 in a billion. There is only one exception, and that is the monozygotic identical twins. Mitochondrial DNA can be used to examine the DNA from the samples that cannot be analyzed by the RFLP or STR. Nuclear DNA must be extracted from samples for use in RFLP, PCR, and STR. However, mitochondrial DNA analysis uses the DNA extracted from another cellular organelle, which is known as the mitochondrion. While older biological samples that lack nucleated cellular material such as hair, bone, and teeth cannot be analyzed by STR and RFLP, they can be analyzed with mitochondrial DNA. So these are other methods also. There is another thing which is known as Y chromosome analysis. The recent innovations have included the creation of primers targeting polymorphic region on the Y chromosomes, YSTR, which allows resolution of a mixed DNA sample from a male and female, and or cases in which a differential extraction is not possible. So suppose if we have sent a specimen to the laboratory from a female, so some of the vaginal secretions will be mixed with the semen. So here, if the Y chromosomes, these can be separated, then there will not be any mixing of the genetic material of the female or the victim with the assailant. Now, interpretation of the results. Mind you, it is very difficult. I have been shown a few reports of the DNA laboratory, and it is difficult to read and then to interpret. Interpretation of the DNA examination is done by the DNA databases. There are now several DNA databases in existence around the world. Some are private, but most of the largest databases are government controlled. In the United States, it maintains the largest DNA database. When a match is made from a national DNA data bank to link a crime scene to an offender who has provided a DNA sample to the data bank, that link is often referred to as cold hit. So it means that if a person has already been convicted, or the DNA sample of a person of an offender is already present with the data bank of the DNA, and then when this same offender is involved in another crime and a new sample of his DNA is found and it is analyzed and then it is matched with the record which is already present, and if both of them they are matched, then we say it is a cold hit, a hit. That is, we have found that he is the same person who is involved in the second crime. A cold hit is of value in referring the police agency to a specific suspect. So if the crime scene DNA is matching with the DNA which is present with the agency in its record, then the police is informed that this DNA which you have provided, it is from a specific person such and such. So these are the barcodes. This is the end result of that DNA examination. The electrophoresis and certain barcodes are provided, and these barcodes, they are analyzed and they are compared. So the pattern of these barcodes, it is specific, just like the pattern on the fingerprints. That's why this method is known as DNA fingerprinting. But it is not actually fingerprinting. It is just a misnomer. Now these are various samples. You can see that there is a brush present, and from the brush, a few strands of the hair, these are being extracted so that DNA examination may be performed on the hair. Another is a very small amount of just a few drops of blood which is present on the upper part of the shoe, and from this blood examination also DNA can be extracted. Now these are chance specimens. These are chance specimens which may be found, but the optimal sample which is to be taken is neither hair nor blood. This is the diagrammatic representation of the helix of the DNA, a double strand which is made up of phosphorus and pentose sugars, and then they are connected in between by the amino acids, and each twist it has got 10 such horizontal rungs. You can see the double helix, which is sugar phosphate backbones, and then the horizontal rungs or the interlinks. These are formed by the amino acid adenine, tyramine, guanine, cytosine. So adenine is always going to combine with tyrosine, and guanine is always going to attach itself with cytosine. And this combination picture, these are the base of the DNA examination. Achha. This is the hair. This is the hair having got a sheath, and from this sheath we can have the nuclear material. This is a fingerprint, and in comparison there is the DNA helix. Again, these are the specimen which may be required for DNA examination. It is a tooth, it is blood, it is various swabs from the buccal cavity, or there may be semen, there may be hair, there may be bone. So various specimens may be required. These are the chromosomes, Y chromosomes and X and Y chromosomes. These are the various DNA examinations. The hair which have been found stained with blood. These are various hairs. You can see the Caucasian hair, which is light in color, the Mongoloid hair, which is dark with pigmentation, and the Negroid hair. These are the barcodes, which are due to the electrophoresis of various proteins. This is the result which is obtained. And this is the forensic genealogy. It is not only the medico-legal examinations which may be helpful. From the mitochondrial DNA examination, we can also may be able to say the various ethnic groups. So this finishes the identification, and I hope that you will be able to remember something of this. Okay, thank you very much.